welcome to the podcast. This show is entirely dedicated to the wisdom and the stories of people embracing their true and extraordinary nature, of overcoming, breaking through limits, tapping into universal wisdom, and hopefully inspiring you to do the same. Hey, hello, we are back with Being Extraordinary. Today it's just me again. I'm still trying to roll out more episodes for the mini karma series. And the mini karma series is me essentially attempting to divulge some information that I've picked up along the way and keep it as a reference bank, honestly. So obviously to share with anyone listening, but people sometimes ask me to divulge additional details about certain subjects. And, they want it in just like a passing message. And it's very challenging to explain these very large concepts that have unveiled themselves to me over time in just a one-on-one conversation. So this will act as sort of a little reference bank for people who ask these types of questions. I can draw their attention to this episode. This episode is all about the shifting of the ages. I've been meaning to do this for a while, and finally we are here. So this, as I kind of divulge about the turning of the ages, I want to just preface it by saying that this is a fairly intuitive pickup. I'm going to reference things like past lives, the evolution of humanity. I'm definitely going to reference astrology, and I do consider myself an astrologist, an astrologer. I take a lot of it. I've been trained in sort of a really unique way. And I think it gives me a unique perspective, and I'm always learning. I'm pretty sure astrology is a type of science that no matter if you studied it your whole life, you'd never learn it all. It has so many layers and so many ways of being interpreted. So having said that, if you're an astrologer and you're hearing me describe things and you're like, I do agree with whatever you're saying, that doesn't sound right, that's possible. There's so many different ways of interpreting astrology, and if you don't interpret it the same way, that's perfectly fine. So as I use that as a reference, I have been learning it in a different way. So let me just allude to or explain how I have learned astrology so that you understand where my frame of reference might be a little bit different. So I'm first and foremost an Akashic Records reader. So I started immediately reading the records of a person's soul. So past lives, future potentials, and with a specific point of interest in karma, and seeing how karma evolves, and seeing how we don't get a get out of jail free card. We're always unraveling karma. We're always balancing karma. And so because of that, I first of all started learning very deeply about past lives and about how past lives work, and essentially like what people are working on. And then I started looking into astrology. So I had a fairly good take and perspective on the reincarnation loop. And then I was pulling in astrology through a karmic perspective. So past lives, what we're working out, what we're learning, what we're balancing. So I look at them as very broad archetypes. I look at them for what lessons they bring, what evolutions they bring, what healing they bring. And I'm able to see it from a lens of already having a resource bank of seeing people's past lives. And then you're like, oh, I see what they're working on the grander scheme, which is XYZ karma. So I learned it secondarily, and I learned it through a lens of karma. So I'm a karmic astrologer, and I look at it through these evolutionary standpoints, not definitions and personalities, so to speak. So having said that, I wanted to do this episode dedicated to the changing of the times, and what exactly is that, and what does it look like? Time is not technically linear. It's actually cyclical. And if we use that cyclical analogy, there's every 2,000-ish years, we will experience a changing of the astrological influence for that said block of time. So as you hopefully are noticing, we are literally in the year 2024 as I record this. So we are just at the turning point of when time changed last, right? So 2,000 years ago, essentially. And it's not a perfect date. It has overlapping of the ages, overlapping of the eras. So it's not like, oh, on this date specifically. And if you go back, so when did time begin, essentially like the 2000 AD? So the last age that we've been experiencing for as long as any of us will be able to remember is the age of Pisces. And who brought in the age of Pisces? It would be the time that Jesus lived, right? 2,000 years ago. We literally started counting time differently upon his death. And we've been living with his teachings as the foundations of the age that we've been in. So Pisces has been what we have known and what we have been experiencing as the collective theme for Earth realm or Earth game for the last 2,000 years. And the astrological wheel rotates backwards, essentially. So we're actually moving into now, as we speak, the 2,000-year window is shifting, and we're moving into the Age of Aquarius, which is very exciting. So I think it probably works best if I describe where we're coming from in order to illuminate where we're going. So where we're coming from is definitely a time that was foundationally rang in by the teachings of Jesus. But the tricky thing about the Pisces energy is it's represented by the two fish. So kind of represented in duality, in the yin and the yang, in the reality and in the subconscious. There's these realms, like, right, the fish in the depiction of Pisces usually looks like kind of one fish under the water, one fish above the water. So there is this dual nature to the era that we've been a part of. And that's very significant because even though the age of Pisces was foundationally set upon the teachings of Jesus, it doesn't mean that that was used properly, that we were given all points of truth, etc. It was actually very dualistic. So I'm not really well versed in the teachings of Jesus. I will just say that right front and center. So everything I'm saying is somewhat like paraphrased. But with the teachings of Jesus, some of his core foundations were that essentially God is found within. The divine is found within us, something that we can't see below the water in the subconscious. And he was really teaching us to sort of listen to our inner compass, listen to our inner guide, and allow like the God within, allow the divine within to move us. And Pisces energy, and as well as what Jesus taught, was very much like universal love, that everyone is our brother, everyone is our sister, and we are all in this life together. So treat other people kindly. And it wasn't at the expense of self. You have to treat yourself kindly first and foremost, but treat other people kindly because, like there's teachings of him, protecting prostitutes and things like this because, he was like, well, at soul level, we all come from the same place. Who am I to judge? It's not my place to judge. I just love you unconditionally. So that was really what some of this founded upon, the spirituality. But it was meant to be essentially a communion within ourselves. And even at the time, and even in Jesus' story, let's be honest, he is very much ahead of his time to the point where the information that he's bringing forth, people aren't necessarily receiving it super well. There are people who want his knowledge and his teachings so that they can use that as a power grab for themselves. There are people who want to obliterate his teachings because it goes against whatever they stood for. And in the end, Jesus is persecuted and he's crucified for essentially believing what he believes and being who he is. So when we take that and put it into an entire era, what begins to show up is certain themes around, and it's not a perfect science, right? There's two fish. There's two ways that all these things could manifest, but bear with me because we have to explain and start somewhere. So there are themes of spirituality that have been foundational in the last 2,000 years. And if we look at really anything that has been the foundation of our society for a very long time. It's really only recently that we're kind of shifting the way that our beliefs look. So lots of wars are about religion. Lots of the beliefs and structures that have taken place over the last 1,000 years have been centered around church or temples or mosques. It's been very religious based. there have been a lot of elements of sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed himself and said, okay, well, if I'm going to cause all sorts of this kind of trouble, then I'll just kind of do this thing, be crucified. So there are themes of sacrifice. We can kind of reflect on that, right? Like, we sell our labor Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 to get a paycheck. We have children and we have to sacrifice some of our dreams and ambitions and time to parent. We have to sacrifice all types of things in order to essentially live harmoniously or be able to provide and love thy neighbor, and then these types of things. So there is elements of sacrifice. And the other key theme that happens is this duality. When we think of those two fish, one above water and below water, the easiest place for us to start, but this will be duality in every sense of the word. The easiest place to start with this concept of duality is kind of like below the surface and above the surface. So below the surface represents our own subconscious, our own realms that are unseen and intangible, right? Water is something that we can't see the bottom of the ocean. It's intangible. We can't capture it. We can't hold it. And it also kind of represents things that are left beneath the surface. So things that we can't see, things that remain hidden. That really symbolizes like the teachings that Jesus gave us about that God is within us. And we have to learn to tune into this unseen, intangible spiritual realm within us in order to facilitate our own relationship with like our spirituality and God within us. That was, I think, what he was trying to teach. But because there are still themes of this unseen realm, it translates to humanity as things are going on in the background that we can't see. We can't see the motivations. There have been tons of things hidden from the public, tons of, government operations, things like extraterrestrial life, like what the motives are, where we're spending money. There's tons of things that have remained hidden and beneath the surface from humanity in general. Even the truth of Jesus' teachings are very hard to find because he was persecuted. People wanted his teachings. They wanted this power. He was very mystical. He could create miracles. People wanted that knowledge for themselves to hide it. So there's been a lot of power, hoarding, a lot of keeping people in place, a lot of removal of information, hiding of truth. And then when we look at the above surface, there's these things we can measure, things we can touch, things we can see, reality, so to speak. And the two are not always going to compute. The reality that we're seeing and touching and feeling is probably very driven by these things hidden in the shadows, these things hidden in realms we can't see. And it translates to every realm of life. It's not only our society, our government, it's into institutions like, education and religion. It's the way that our relationships operate, the way we run families. There's going to be these subconscious, unseen factors that are essentially driving the way that things are appearing on the surface. And even though the teachings of Jesus were what he was trying to do at the turn of the tide was to get people to dive into their own inner realms, find their own truth, and bring things to the surface so that they can't be duped, they can't be controlled, that they are listening to that inner compass. But that's not necessarily how it all played out, because there's a lot of forces out there that want control and wanted to control the masses into, a force that then sacrifices themselves for the greater good, which is again a Jesus thing, right? So enroll in the army or whatever, and you're going to be on the front lines and somewhat do this, go to work every day, pay your taxes. There's a lot of people kind of extorting the life force of humanity right now. And that just happened to be the way that it went. And if we would have taken heed of Jesus's teachings, we would have been much better adept to have positive relationships, to create work that's meaningful, and to really be this mystical society that we are. For some people, it did go that way, right? In some communities, those things were heeded and they're doing a lot better. But now we're at the turning of the era, and we're moving into a new age. And this age it'll be Aquarius themed. So what we're literally witnessing the shifting of the times right now. And that's why everything feels so crazy, because guess what? Aquarius is the water bearer. So what Aquarius represents is essentially archetype of someone who's very much ahead of their time, thinking outside the box, kind of a renegade, very almost like curious in an intellectual way. Aquarius is an air sign. It is about the mind. It is about curiosities. It is about thinking about all these types of things. But one of the main things that happens with Aquarius is that he's studying and computing and looking at people and processing what's happening. And all of a sudden, he's starting to click things into place. Click, click, click. This makes sense. This is this. This is this. Okay, I see. And he sees this big, huge picture. And what happens is he's the water bearer. So he starts pouring out compassion from this well, because when you start to see things from this very broad perspective and you start to understand truly what's going on, the only thing that can be born of that is compassion. And his story as like an archetype, because we're using Jesus as an archetype for Pisces, if we were to use an archetype for Aquarius, the story can be best seen in the story of Prometheus, which everything has a good and a bad, right? So Prometheus was one of the gods. He was a part of Mount Olympus. He was one of the elites, one of the people, right? And he had dinner on Mount Olympus while all the people, the humans, were, down at the bottom of the mountain. And what happens is the gods have decided all this time that they don't want to give man fire. They don't think man and humans can handle this type of power, this type of responsibility. So they withhold a really valuable tool in the evolution of humanity. And Prometheus is thinking that he doesn't agree with this, essentially. He's a free thinker, and he's not a conformist, and he's not about to just do as he's told. Aquarius is known to be rebellious, known to be the rebel, the rebel rouser, the freedom fighter. So he's pondering this, because he's an air sign, he's thoughtful. And he says, this doesn't sit well with me. This doesn't sit right with me. And he, I think in the story, rallies, the Olympians, and he says, the gods of gods, like, this isn't right. We can't do this. We must give man their fair chance. We must give them their fair chance at equality, give them their power, let them see what they do with it. They'll never evolve if we don't give them the opportunity. And so the gods don't agree. They don't agree with Prometheus, and he decides to rebel against the Olympians, and he takes man fire. So he defies the gods, essentially, and gives humanity their power back, or gives humanity a sense of power and ownership over themselves, and the freedom to do what they please with it. But, of course, Prometheus is found out, and he is the one in Greek mythology who is strapped to a rock, and every single day, his pancreas or something, gets eaten out by like an eagle or whatever, and every night it regrows to be eaten out again as a punishment. We need to think about this in the evolution. We need to think about this, about what we're seeing in the news, what's been going on, what's shaking and shifting. So we're coming from a place where there are things hidden in the shadows, and there's kind of these people in power in the age of Pisces that are withholding information and trying to get people to sacrifice themselves in order to consolidate the power into the hands of the people in the shadow, right? The people beneath the surface. And so in the age of Aquarius, what will happen is we're not dealing with the two dualities anymore. So everything that has been hidden will literally come to light. And we are already seeing that. I'll circle back to it. And the other aspect is that there's going to be a lot of people rebelling against these power systems and these control, and they're wanting to take their sovereignty back. They're wanting to take their own freedom back, their freedom to be who they want. We don't want to sacrifice anymore. And we see this in the generations, right? When millennials came forth, they said, oh, these people have the worst work ethics. And we're saying it again about the next generation. And what's really happening, it's not about the work ethic. It's about the sacrifice for no reward that is dying. And honestly, power to the people that are shaking that up, because honestly, the sacrificial thing is like, I'm done with that too, So what's happening is all these things are coming to light, and the sacrificial journey is now over. People want to reclaim their freedom, and they're doing it in a rebellious type of way. And what we're also seeing is, because Aquarius is eventually he turns into this compassionate person, right? So we're seeing people really starting to analyze and see the inequalities that exist on this planet. And a lot of people are really recognizing it and saying, like, no, we have to have compassion for all different walks of life and all different people. We're clearly at the very, very cusp of this. It's just beginning. The Age of Aquarius has only recently begun to show itself. So we don't have it mastered yet, okay? I'm not saying like, oh, if we're talking about this type of equality or this type of this, I'm not saying that the science and the way that we're going about things is actually practical yet. We're in our infancy stages of being compassionate, of thinking that we all deserve to be equal, right? Because that was Prometheus's thing. That was Aquarius's thing, where he was like, we all deserve sovereignty. We all deserve our personal power. We get to decide how we want to live our life. And that's truly starting to happen, right? So what are we seeing that is in alignment right now with that turning of the tide? Well, there is, first of all, a ton of stuff coming to light that was previously hidden. We are seeing things on the news about like alien life force. We're seeing things on the news about the corruption of our governments and their secret agendas and where they've been funneling resources and money. We are seeing things about, just any institution. We're starting to see some of the things that have happened in the church, and I'm in Canada, so we're really seeing things come to light about the residential schools and what was really happening in those places and how the church was a contributing factor to that. We are seeing the faults in healthcare and the greed of the people at the top that are asking so much of our healthcare staff. We're seeing the gaps in information dissemination. We're seeing the money laundering. We're seeing the brothers in the background trying to like work, give their friends money and lying to the public. We're seeing things in the education, like where I'm at, the schools have been on strike for the entire school year in so far. And we're seeing, the greed and the corruption and the lack of resources and the lack of education that's coming down because of the burnt out instructors and things like this. We are seeing, the lies, right? There's this whole joke about millennials being like the most educated people in humanity or educated generations, but having an extremely difficult time actually accumulating wealth because it was a lie. It was a lie that you can go to school and get a good education and make something of yourself. There's this revelation happening. Tons of like conspiracies and psyops have come out, and people get to decide for themselves what they wish to believe. But there are even something recently of some of the celebrities in our country and like Epstein Island and all the horrible human trafficking that's likely been going on for decades now is finally coming to light. And, some of these like elitist parties and clubs and like there's been a lot of these things finally coming to the surface, and they're going to continue to come to the surface because this dual nature of below the surface, above the surface is coming to an end. So I've heard so many people say things like, oh my goodness, it's so bad, everything's so awful. No, what's really happening is this stuff has been going on for a long, long time, but it's been hidden from us. And now it's coming to the surface because we're in a different era. We're in a different age. So we're seeing that disappear. We're seeing this reclamation of personal power and not wanting to sacrifice anymore. We're seeing people leave the traditional working systems in mass numbers. We're seeing more entrepreneurs spark up. We're seeing people kind of rebel against, yes, sir, I'll do as I'm told, I'll work the hours. We're seeing less and less people want to comply. We're seeing people prioritize their truth, their freedom, what they want. Do they want to be with their families? Do they want to be entrepreneurs? Do they want to have a slower pace of life? Truth is subjective. So people are choosing things in mass quantities, but there's definitely been some themes that I've noticed of people leaving traditional work, leaving traditional school settings, leaving traditional healthcare. There's so many people that are starting to grow their own food again, or thinking about community living, or thinking about moving off the grid, or leaving just even things about like producing their own food and moving away from toxins and reclaiming their health. There's been a huge health movement. It's very confusing still because, again, there's still this dual nature of dark versus light, truth versus control, all that happening. So we're in our infancy stages. It's still very confusing, but you can see it, you can feel it. There's been a massive health movement where people are actually taking care of their bodies. They're being very conscious about what they're putting into their bodies. And there's people like starting to want to take responsibility for their health and well-being instead of leaning into systems that we're learning aren't really serving us because of the way they're operating from this shadow hidden era. It's coming to light. We're taking our power back. Like, I've seen so many people look into alternative medicine, right? And something that is good to note is the times are changing, and there's a lot of people that have had a lot of power for a very long time who are trying to stop this from happening, because this is the age of Aquarius. And the theme that I told you in the story is really like, we're taking the power and decision making away from the few elites up in Mount Olympus, and we're bringing the power back down to the people. There's very much an equality happening. There's very much a reclamation of power happening. And the people up in Mount Olympus that have been running the world for a long time, they don't like this. This is not good for them. So we do have to be very cognizant and aware that there probably are some agendas happening that are trying to continue to keep us in the dark. They're trying to continue to disempower us, right? So when we talk about in Canada, I can only speak to Canada, but I was talking about this reclamation of health and wellness, right? Well, something interesting that's happened is the clawback is, for some reason, our government decided to begin to regulate like vitamins and supplements. And there's been this threat to like natural health food stores that all of a sudden these things are going to come off the shelves. And it's trying to drive us back into disempowerment, trying to drive us back into just kind of blindly trusting the gurus. And this isn't a diss on Jesus. Jesus was just used as an archetype, but also like Jesus was this like leader and we all listened to him. And even though he was preaching that we need to listen to ourselves, being people that don't have that connection to the inner world very well or quite well yet, we were just listening to him and hanging off every word and making him this authority on the subject. Well, that has also carried over from the Pisces era, where there's some sort of guru or expert that knows best, and we have been just blindly following or listening. Well, the Age of Aquarius isn't about that anymore. We're listening to ourselves. Just as there's been distortions and manipulations with there was a really pure intention with the Age of Pisces, right? There was a lot of good there. Pisces is a great sign. It's a very spiritual, loving, compassionate sign, right? But there's still ways to mutate it for the sense of power, which will be the same with Aquarius, but we'll get there in a minute. With the Age of Pisces that we're leaving, one of the mutations also is that I mentioned earlier that Pisces is really founded on universal love. And there was a lot of this loving energy taking place, and that's why we were manipulated so easily, right? It's like, go to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, burn yourself out, go above and beyond to be recognized. But why did we do that? Oftentimes we did it for our family. We did it to be good citizens, good community members. It was really in a lot of ways like we did a lot of the sacrificing for this love. But when we don't love ourselves first and we choose to sacrifice, we only rob that universal love, right? We can't engage in universal love if we don't even love ourselves, right? Like the self-love always happens first and then it fuels out of us, right? Everything's a mirror. What's going on within you, that's what your world will look like. It will be reflected back to you in all of your situations and circumstances. So because of the dual nature of Pisces season, it's like I do believe that for the most part, the powers that be really sort of contorted and distorted those beautiful teachings. because we weren't listening to ourselves the way that Jesus asked us to. We decided to listen to the gurus and we gave them all the power. And now we're in the undoing, we're in the reclamation. And then the compassion, right? The compassion, the humanitarianism, we're really starting to fight for equality. We're really even starting to see a society where we can't even compartmentalize people anymore. People are so dynamic now, right? There's not a lot of boxes and labels and, us versus them. And that will continue to evolve. If there's going to be any type of us versus them, it's going to be like the masses versus the people who have been withholding all of our power. But again, we're in infant stages. We're just trying to figure it out now. So what does the negative side of Aquarius look like, and how we can be vigilant for those types of traps or issues and not go that route via our power of manifesting and choosing our own destiny and writing our own legacy. So the downside of Aquarius would be that he first of all starts out like he's in the mind, he's in the head, and he's definitely ahead of his time. So we can expect a lot of radical inventions and advances in technology. And if used correctly, these advances in technology and new inventions will likely be that and there to serve humanity for the greater good and the positive. But if we lean too much into the science, too much into the mind, and we forget our humanity, there could be this overtake of technology that is not necessarily serving humanity. It's technology for the sake of being smart, for being ahead of the time, for being this, that, or the other. And it could take away from our humanity. And we have seen big advancements with AI. And there's kind of a joke on the online community. It's like, I thought AI was going to start doing our menial tasks like the dishes and things, but instead it's making art. Like, no, humanity needs to make the art. And the technological advancements should be for increasing the quality of life. And artisans should now have more time to make art, right? So we see that, again, we're in the infancy stages. So science and technology could really see this big advancement. And if it doesn't have that humanitarian piece, it could literally take away from our humanity. The other thing that happens is in the story of Prometheus, well, he's punished for being a rebel. He's punished for defying the gods. So we're it's hard to say because how do we know? We're just starting the Age of Aquarius. But people are going to rebel. People are rebelling. And there may be certain aspects of us that do get in trouble with the law. And we are somewhat punished. And we are somewhat, made an example of for not following the rules. And we have seen a clampdown on the law, right? With technology, like if we think about, pre-internet and things like that, and DNA and all these types of things, like people could get away with tons of things, but there's cameras at stoplights, and now we can't get away with anything. So we're very, very accountable to the rebellious acts that we participate in. But there's definitely an encouraging energy with Aquarius to rebel. But rebelling in areas in which is great for the greater good, for being the humanitarian, for the collective. If you're just running a red light to run a red light, you may expect to get ticketed more. You may expect to be made accountable. But because everything's an evolution, right? We have 2,000 years of the Age of Aquarius upon us, right? That we're going to continue to evolve. And we just might have to work out some of the kinks at the beginning that look a little bit like, being made an example of. But something else that happens with Aquarius is they are often ahead of their time. They're thinking outside the box. They're bringing radical new age ideas to the industry. And at first, it kind of feels like everyone's like, who's the weird kid? Who's this person? And the story kind of starts with this feeling of being different, this feeling of being kind of ostracized by the community. But the longer you hold the vision and the more convicted you are, you suddenly become the leader. But in this equalized way, where it's like, you feel I always say there's this example that comes to mind, and it definitely lends itself to the Aquarius evolution, where, we suddenly feel like I'm not the same as everyone else. I'm not thinking like them. I'm seeing things in a totally different light, and I'm seeing it from this big perspective. And yeah, at first you're going to feel really weird. But I've heard, in sessions before, things like, well, you're not one of the sheep because you're one of the shepherds. And it's not meant to be like, oh, you're watching over the flock, but like you're just a little bit more advanced right now. But the more that you bring those teachings and that awareness, and then all of a sudden it's like everyone, like you start to attract your fellow shepherds, right? You attract people who are on your level, but they can't find you if you do not show up as your authentic self. So the Aquarian energy also asks for radical self-expression, even if it's unique, even if it's different, even if it's groundbreaking, even if it's ahead of your time. And that's also where we start to see this new age awareness, because Aquarius in the zodiac is also kind of like they're sometimes akin to like alien energy. So I'm really not surprised that we're seeing, more and more stuff come out about extraterrestrial life or about UFOs, but they're known for kind of bringing forth this really ahead of their time, renegade type evolutionary knowledge. And they feel kind of like the aliens. They're different. They're seeing things weird, but they're actually the people that revolutionize and change the game for good. And when you can push past that discomfort, you can attract your tribe of other like-minded weirdos or aliens. So there is a little bit of like loneliness that the Aquarius story starts out with, where we are going on the path less traveled and people are definitely judging you, being like, what the heck? But as soon as you keep walking, you start to attract your actual like-minded kindred spirits. And you're not going to find them. You're going to remain isolated the longer you hide your truth. That's why so many people are also awakening to these kind of new age techniques, right? Whenever I think about an Aquarius, they are such a scientist, but they don't rule anything out. They are willing to study the science and the data and the facts and the studies, but they're not going to rule out the alternative things. They're the ones who take the astronomy class and study the science of the stars, but then they're also going to be the astrologists. They're not going to dismiss what is not been practiced yet. They're the people that are willing to chart into the unknown and find out. And then what ends up happening is that's where they get their mad genius. That's where they get their revolutionary ideas, because they are not in the box at all. They're willing to ask the questions and find the answers on their own versus being told that something's acceptable or not. So Aquarius in the zodiac wheel often does represent the new age. It does often represent alternative modes of healing. It does represent sometimes astrology. It does represent, things like energy work and Reiki and all these things that we're able to use and rely on medicine that's been proven, but we're also going to begin to integrate maybe things like energy work or meditation or and put these two sciences side by side. Just because one isn't sitting, it's not necessarily always measurable, Aquarius is still willing to embrace that. So that's also why we see this massive spiritual awakening taking place, where people are dabbling in different modalities. And there's like kind of a secondary theme there, right? Because these types of modalities were very much persecuted. They were very much hidden. They were very much not accepted in previous times. And Aquarius as the rebel is like, no, I don't care. I'm going for it. I'm curious about it. I'm interested in it. And I'm going to bring it to the surface. So there's a lot of healing taking place on this planet right now. So that's kind of what's going on. So the reason I decided to do this podcast is I did make a post and I was like, things are changing. This is the new earth. You're the leader now. And someone's like, can you elaborate on this? And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because we're all experiencing such significant change in what we consider normal. We don't know who to trust anymore. The institutions are crumbling. Really tragic things are coming to light. Who are we to look to now for guidance and information? And it feels very confusing and uncertain. And the reason I decided to share this podcast is because we are the leaders now. This is the time when humanity reclaims their rightful place as equals on this planet. And the only way that's going to happen is if we truly begin to listen to ourselves, to be as authentic as possible, regardless of how different or unique or ahead of our times we feel. And we have to, the only person to look to now is going to be us. The whole idea of having a guru or having a savior or having a sacrificial lamb who's going to take one for the team and die for our sins, that era is over now. And this is where we are going to be radically responsible for our outcomes. And we are going to trust the sciences and universal laws that exist in the background that maybe we can't measure and haven't been a part of traditional mainstream teachings. And we're going to have to be the experimenters. We're going to have to follow our mad genius. We're going to have to ask ourselves, what does freedom look like? And really start to construct our reality based upon these things. But it can feel incredibly scary when we've just followed a narrative for a long time, a narrative that's clearly no longer working. So now we have to turn within. Now we have to restructure our beliefs, restructure our desires, and listen to these things. And it does feel incredibly scary. Like, I just wanted to call everyone who's listening for one moment to, how much has your trust broken over the last 10 years in certain institutions, right? Like, even myself, I've always been a little bit skeptical on some of the things that we're told. I've always been a little bit that way. But like, I can't even tell you how much my trust has continued to decline in any type of government, in any type of healthy food being sold to us in the market. I feel like I'm nervous about medicine and diagnosis. Like, I don't know if I trust all these things all the time. I don't have children, but like, even just like post-secondary education, like, I've become incredibly aware of how maybe our educational institutions aren't always with our best interest in mind, and how much corruption and greed has been taking place. Like, every day I feel like I lose more of that. And that is a part of this game. We are going to continue to have our faith tested in anything outside of ourselves and our brethren and our sisters here on the ground. And we see that if we're going to see this advancement in technology, this advancement in like brotherhood and sisterhood, we do see it taking place somewhat on social media. I'm not saying that's a positive thing, but technological advancements, connecting more with our people, like the line of separation now, the degree of separation between people is like 2 degrees now. If you went and clicked on some random person who lived in like Cairo, Egypt, it's like you would be able now to like say, oh my God, we have a mutual person only two people out. Like, that's how connected we're all becoming. I don't want to say, again, infancy stages. I don't want to say the way we connect on social media is the be all and end all. It needs work, right? There's some humanity that's missing from it, which is like literally the evolution of Aquarius. Aquarius starts out as this analytical, science-oriented, alien-type technology kind of person. But then all of a sudden, like, the longer they look at it, the more they're like, I see how things click and we have to align with one another. And he becomes the compassionate humanitarian who uses his knowledge, uses his resources, uses his wisdom to pour into humanity. And so really, Aquarius is like analytical overthinker, trying to make sense of something, turns rebel, becomes a little bit isolated, and then turns humanitarian. Like, that's sort of the progress. So again, infancy stages, we're working through right now the phase of Aquarius that would be a lot like, wait, is this even making sense anymore? We're trying to connect the dots. We're trying to see what's happening. And again, we're all going to eventually have this eureka moment where we're like, oh my God, the only people we can trust is each other. So in order for a new age to really be born, we do have to see the old age crumble. And that's sort of the era we're in right now. All the things we blindly trust, all the things that we do subconsciously and we don't ask ourselves for the answer, it's going to be rattled until we wake up. And the beauty is, again, I'm not super aware of like the predictions and prophecies all the time in the sacred text, But the Age of Aquarius does represent the golden age, where there's like finally peace on earth at some point, and it's a very beautiful and sacred time. There's sort of two, I can't remember why, but just the way that light filters onto this planet, there are two astrological signs that represent the age of the light. And it is the Age of Aquarius, which we're all moving into, and it's very exciting, and the Age of Leo, which is the polar opposite of the astro wheel, and we are very far away from that. So just as a slight background in the more metaphysical aspect, so the Age of the Light is why you're here. This is a very beautiful transformation for Mother Earth to be going under, and you're going with her. One of the reasons there's so many like light workers and healers on the planet is that this is one of the things that was deeply tried to be suppressed. The teachings of Jesus and like this personal power and spirituality was something that was very much hidden or trying to be hidden in order to allow the control to take place. There's a lot of like old healers and wisdom keepers and knowledge holders that have been persecuted within these last eons. And this is the Age of the Light, and what is light? Light is really information, enlightenment, the amount of knowledge, the reclamation of spiritual truth and sovereignty. And this doesn't happen that often on this planet, right? So there's a lot of karmic releases taking place on this planet where the people who have been persecuted, the people who have not been able to share their wisdom, the people who have been burned at the stake or jailed for corrupting the youth and all these things. We're on this planet right now because we finally get our homecoming. We finally get the moment where we can bring our wisdom and our light to this planet and it be celebrated. If we think about light in that definition, what is love, right? It is seeing yourself and others and allowing like information and health and healing and all these beautiful things to be shared amongst the people. So to me, when we talk about love and light, light is enlightenment. Light is knowledge. Light is information. Light is awareness and consciousness, the understanding of what's going on. So what is darkness? We are leaving a very dark time where information has been withheld. Truth has been withheld. Empowerment has been withheld and put beneath the surface. So if you're wondering like, oh, all these spiritual people and everyone's suddenly an expert and a wizard, like, yeah, there's probably some people out there doing it for the wrong reasons, just to get an ego bump, to feel good about themselves on social media, 100%. But there are also a lot of people who are here to finally feel safe to be themselves. The rebel, the unique, the eclectic. To finally see freedom. To finally be able to share their soul's wisdom in a place where it's revered instead of persecuted. This is a beautiful karmic checkpoint for people. And that's why we're seeing it. And, even with the people who are doing it for the wrong reasons right now, there's kind of an evolution. You can, with the Age of the Light and bringing things to the surface, bringing things to light, even when you lie to yourself or even when you lie to the people around you, these lies aren't going to make it anymore, right? There's nothing that can remain hidden in the Age of the Light. There's nothing that can remain hidden when everything's boiling to the surface. So people will just get their karma, right? And there's enough room for all of us. There's a lot of people on this planet. It doesn't need to be a competition. And just to note as well, there's also a lot of people dying. There's a lot of death. And the reason for that is literally when you move into the Age of the Light and sort of what's taking place in the background with Mother Earth, because she's also sick of all the pain and torment and, being like mined for her resources and not appreciated. She's kind of sick of it. And in the Age of the Light, she gets to reclaim her rightful place also as an equal, where we actually have reverence for her. And basically, like, there's a huge vibrational shift happening, right? From this incomplete lack of understanding, above the surface, below the surface, and lots of power and sacrifice and manipulation. And there's a lot of that happening, and it can feel very heavy and dark and somewhat like low vibrational in a way. And all of a sudden, we're getting blasted with this high vibrational energy, and it's like waking us all up, and it's literally very physically uncomfortable. And some people just aren't able at this junction to move through this grand evolution, and they're opting to leave because it does become very chaotic. And if you really want to go into the deep darkness or like the conspiracy of it all, I'm going to speak of it in biblical terms, but it's really a splitting off of dimensions. It's a splitting off of realities. There are some people who still want control and obedience and sacrifice and the old way. And because we have free will on this planet, they're allowed to continue to experience that if they should choose to. And there's this pull of people wanting freedom, sovereignty, connection, community, and trusting. Like, no more of this darkness. We want the light. We want the truth. We want freedom. So then there's like this pull, like this fight happening, this pulling apart. There's some people who want the free will of corruption and greed and all these things. And then there are some people who want freedom. And those people have the right to experience their freedom with their free will as well. So in the biblical predictions, it talks about the end of a world and then people getting like saved into this new world. Right? So what's really happening is Mother Earth doesn't care if the people who have been corrupting and mining and extorting from her want to keep doing that. But she's like, I'm leaving. You guys can keep trying to control me. You can keep mining me. You can keep like being greedy and all these things. But I'm reincarnating. That old me needs to die. And I'm going into the age of the light. I want to reincarnate and I want to have respect and love. And I want to be like healthy and instead of being pillaged all the time and controlled. So she said, I'm reincarnating. And basically the humans that can get on the program can go with her and reincarnate into this new golden age of the light. And if you're here listening to this, you're one of the people, relax. But people that can't jump from the old world to the new world, most of them are just choosing to die. They're just saying like, I can't figure this out. I'm just going to leave. I'll try again next time. So there are people leaving in mass exodus. It's a part of the prediction. It's a part of this, that, and the other. And the old world is literally dying. It's going into its own apocalypse. And it's symbolic. It's not a real apocalypse, but it's going into this symbolic death. And if you can't get with the program, then essentially you'll probably perish. And in the new world, it'll be like, like nice and light and beautiful. But all of this was written before you even arrived. So don't like stew on it. Don't overthink it. You're where you need to be. Just keep following your heart. And yeah, we're doing it. We're really doing it, guys. I think that's all I really had to say on the matter. So thanks for tuning in. And hopefully I will be making podcasts more regularly.